Our next guest is here, and a lady who I saw perform at a charity function just last week. An amazing gig. Really, I love when you have comedy where people actually stand up and tell jokes, and that's exactly what happened here. So welcome back to 101 FM, to international stage and screen artist, performer, bubble. I know. That was good, wasn't it?
That was good. I didn't know you were talking about me.
No, clearly. I've seen the act.
Thank you.
So listen, first of all, thank you for coming into 101. It's great to see you here, and I loved what you did. I mean, for me, it was harking back to the days of, dare I say, the variety shows that you and I kind of grew up with back in the UK.
Yes, and sadly, I think in this country and in the UK now as well, there's not so much variety as there used to be.
No.
A lot of the problem, I think, is because there's no way in, because television doesn't support variety very well, and it also, the demographic I think they aim for is 25 to 35. So the good old-fashioned variety is very hard to get out there now because of the television. Because
if you think back to, people that we grew up with, Morecambe and Wise, for example, and that was slapstick, it was great comedy. They never had to swear, and there was never even any innuendo with them. But they reached an audience, a demographic of everything from 5 to 95.
Yeah, they did. And there's still some comedy like that available and around, but unfortunately, the majority, it's things change, music's changed,
sure.
Comedy has changed. It's not my favourite type of comedy, the modern comedy, but obviously some people do like it. It's just a shame when they swear when I think they don't need to.
There is no need, and I think it also limits them as well, because I know I'm thinking of Chubby Brown back in the UK,
yeah, mm-hmm.
who is a wonderful performer, but every second word was a swear word. But he made a conscious decision: I'm not doing television. I'm going to do live performing, so people that come to see me, they know what to expect. But with a lot of the comedians you see on TV, you think, wow, it's unnecessary.
It's unnecessary, and the lines have changed. You can get away with a lot more now than you ever could. Even in Sunday Night London Palladium,
yes.
It's a lot nearer to the mark than it used to be. It's just not my personal thing. I don't think you really do need to use bad language to be funny, but it's used as a shock factor, I think, a lot of the time. Somebody says a bad word and suddenly everybody laughs. It's not the joke that's funny or what they've said that's funny, it's the shock factor of the word they've used.
But I don't know, maybe it's just me sort of reaching a certain age now, but I think people are getting a little bit bored, which is, again, going back to what you did when I saw your act. The jokes, first of all, they were topical. I loved the one you did, one about the Broncos, which was great. And I have to just share this with the audience. You've got a room full of people from the Broncos. It was a gig just before a testimonial game,
yes,
wasn't
before
it?
the match, yeah.
So you've got all these Broncos in the room, and Sheila makes this joke about it, and I thought, wow, she'll never get away with that. And the audience loved it.
Yeah, they do. They like topical, and they also like it if you take the mickey out of somebody they know or somebody they're with.
Yes.
That's always, a good move. But they were a great audience. But that's what I do, and that's what a few comics still do, especially more so probably in the UK than over here, is the old-fashioned comedy where you tell a joke, not have you heard the one about, but
no.
In that vein, The modern comedy is, as you say, more observational. They talk about what a bad day they've had and da-de-da. I quite often try and watch some of that stuff on TV, and after 2 or 3 minutes, I haven't heard anything funny, so I turn it off.
Yeah, people like Michael McIntyre are very funny, and he doesn't have to resort to swearing.
That's right, and he's working a lot of television, so he can't afford to resort that way,
Yeah.
I, a few years ago, hosted a television pilot programme, and they had a few singers on. It was like a variety-type show. They had singers on, and they wanted to have comics on one week, and they advertised for comics, and nobody really sort of replied. So they went to the local comedy club to get some comics, and I was the compere, and literally I was going on and getting them off the stage after 2 minutes because it was just not suitable.
Yeah, it's embarrassing as well. And let's face it, you've done it for many, many years. Stand-up comedy is one of the hardest jobs in the world.
They say it is, yes.
You not found that?
No, I haven't, but obviously some people do, and I suppose a lot of comics as well are very introvert off stage. They're not extrovert. They're very depressed, some of them, unfortunately. Even famous people, John Cleese, I think he puts himself away for a few months every year just to get back on track.
Stephen Fry's another one.
Yes.
I remember interviewing Stephen Fry back in the UK, and it was just before, I don't know if you remember the story, he was doing a big play in London, and he had some kind of breakdown, and he just got severe stage fright, and he disappeared completely.
Yeah. I can to a degree, I can understand that, not just from comics, but from anybody who is probably very famous. Everybody expects 100%. And even Donny Osmond had an episode a few years ago where he had a breakdown because he felt he couldn't give out. He was worried he wasn't going to give 100% every time he went on stage. So they took him through therapy and made him realise that even 90% is fine. People don't say he's only giving 90%. So I can understand if you're really famous that it might happen, but it doesn't happen to me because I'm not really famous.
Well, clearly.
Thank you.
I couldn't call you a has-been. I was going to call you a nearly was like me. But so, you got programmes on TV, and I know that you had a little attempt yourself a few years ago at Australia's Got Talent, but they have decided, this is what people who've been on the show have told me, they have decided who they want to win before the auditions even happen.
Oh, yeah, it's all, I don't know really how much I can say on live radio, but yes, they have, and they actually invite professional acts to go on because they need to lift the standard, but it was very much, I found it very, it was like a cattle and sheep out the back. You couldn't go off to, you were waiting, you're going to be on in a minute, 4 hours before you were on in a minute. You couldn't go off to, you couldn't go and do, they also tell you that no one in the audience is allowed to film, and yet they're all there with their iPhones and cameras. And when you go out there and the audience is basically 10 years old, with all their friends that are in the dance classes. So it's television, and never let a good story get in the way of a good program, and it's very much based on the sob story beforehand. Do you have a story, is your mum sick or something like that? And that's what they want. And when you don't have a story, there's nothing there.
And, it turned us off. I mean, the current Mrs. Bennett and I used to be avid viewers of things like Australia's Got Talent, whatever. I'm sorry to sound mercenary, I don't care if somebody had a dog and the dog passed. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love dogs. But I just want to know, is this person funny? Can they sing? Can they play an instrument? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, and it's been the same, I'm going back to the years in the UK, years ago, of Opportunity Knocks, which a lot of your listeners would remember. Yeah. And that, again, my other half was on that, and they actually said to him, this is what you do you want to win?
Wow.
And if you sign this, you can win. Yeah. And it was all very set up because, of course, the people behind the scenes can make a lot of money out of certain people if they win.
Of course.
And if you can get a few hits out of them, and they bleed them dry and then throw them on the heap.
Well, that's what happens to some of these bands as well, and they have two or 3 years where they're raking it in and then they just disappear. So are you saying then, Bubble, that the clapometer wasn't real?
Would I say that? I don't think I said that. You said that.
I'm shocked.
You're in shock. I can see that. It's terrible to learn that after all these years.
Another part of my childhood ruined. But there you are. You did pantomime with your other half.
I did. Yes, and
what was that like?
I love panto. I wish they'd do it over here. It would be. I think it would work very well. It's an institution.
Yes.
And even now, I mean, the runs are not so long now. They used to be, they used to run for about 5-6 weeks, but they're shorter runs now, and there's less, I think, of them. But still, it's an institution. It would really work well. They tried to do it actually in the States, but the Americans didn't quite get how, when someone comes on and they talk to the audience, so the audience is sort of in the panto.
Yes.
And they didn't get that because to them, people on stage are in the play and they're the audience. So they didn't get this interaction, he's behind you and hiss boo.
Oh, no, he isn't.
Oh, yes, he is. But I would love to do a professional panto here. But it would take a lot of work, which is fine. I can do that. But they don't. In the UK, the theatre would buy the panto for a run of X weeks, 2, 4, 5 weeks. So you knew that you had the money coming back for what you'd spent to put the thing together.
Because it is expensive. I mean, apart from anything else, you've got costumes, you've got performers,
you've got scenery, you've got rehearsals, you've got scripts, you've got music. It is a big expense to put up front. And if I knew I had sold it, then I would put it together. But I'm not going to do all that work and then find that somebody says, "Oh yeah, we'll take it for one night," because that's not what you need.
No.
You need a run, and they don't really do that over here. There's not many theatres that do a run of a few weeks. So,
but even again, and I hark back to the good old days, if I dare say, you used to have a summer season that would start in April and go through till October.
Yes.
And now, when you look around any of the seaside resorts back in the UK, you've got Jimmy Carr, for example. He'll do one night in Yarmouth, one night in Bristol, one night in Newcastle, and it's all just these. So the whole season thing has gone.
Yeah, the pier shows are not there anymore like they used to. I mean, there used to be a show on every pier that would run for at least a few weeks, probably a few months, with a headliner at Blackpool, and had 5 or 6, had the 3 or 4 piers and a couple of other venues that would run all the time. And now I think there's only Cromer Pier, I think, from memory, that has a proper show that runs. And then they used to run Monday to Saturday, and then on Sunday they'd have a different show, a visiting show that would be travelling round the different areas doing the Sunday visiting show. And even those now, if you look at a board outside a pier now, there's probably only 3 or 4 concerts throughout the whole summer.
Yeah,
You know?
it's very sad. And it's hard. I mean, we've talked about programs like Australia's Got Talent. Where can young people go? If they don't do the comedy clubs where they're expected to stand up and swear, how do they get into the profession?
Well, they don't, and that's the problem, I think. Even in, here and the UK, there's no grounding for them, not so much as there used to be, There's a few talent school type things where they're training them, but then to get out and get their first gig is very hard.
Yes.
So and especially in theatre and clubland, In the musicals, they have a different way of doing it. You audition for musicals and then you go through that sort of system. But in cabaret and theatre, it's very hard. And I think that's why, also because it's a never-ending circle, because there's not enough work for variety acts, and therefore there's not enough variety acts because there's not enough work.
So
and
it is that circle.
It is that circle, and that's why a lot of them are working on the ships. To be honest, that's the only current growth industry in the entertainment market. So that's why a lot of, and I've got a lot of friends that are permanently basically on the ships. They're on 2 to 3 weeks in every 4.
Well, I know when we had your partner David on here from the Forever Everly duo, they do a lot of cruise work. In fact, they've just come back from
They just come back on Saturday, yes.
Yeah, and that's again, and they're travelling around the world, they're getting a name, and yet it's still difficult to get gigs locally here in Queensland.
Yeah, for example, they and I have worked, in the UK, in New Zealand, in Malaysia, all over the world in various places, but we still struggle just to get anything that's local.
It's a shame.
It's sad.
Although you did have, I know, and unfortunately we couldn't come and see, you had a lovely thing called the Pommy Show, which was local here.
It was the Pommy Night Out show, yes.
Yeah.
And that's still working. That's been going now for probably 10 or 12, or maybe even more years now, 2001. So, yeah, quite a while. And that travels. It still works everywhere, but very, very rarely we have anything local. And, with the Royal Wedding coming up, we should be having a gig on that day, and that's what I'm trying to tell everybody, get everybody in the pommy mood, wave the flags,
Wouldn't it be great, get some, as you say, get the flags there, we could have, the old-fashioned, the tea parties that we used to have back in the day.
Yes, the street party, tea party things. Yeah, we could have one of them. We should organise one.
I think we should.
We should, have it all day, tea party, bit of, a show, bit of comedy, bit of dancing, and then watch the Royal Wedding through the night.
Perfect.
So if there's any venues out there listening, any good agents, anybody
at all. Yeah, well, this is my show, so Bubble, nobody listens to this.
Oh, right, okay, the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. An absolute joy to chat to you. And if people want to know a little bit more, I guess you've got a Facebook page.
I have, yes. I think it's if they Google it, I'm sure it'll come up. Bubble. I think it's Bubble Comedienne or something like that. But there I'll be. Yeah.
So the Trade Descriptions Act haven't come on to you yet?
For fake news, no.
Perry should have thought that could happen. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you want to learn a little bit more about Bubble and the amazing work that she does, and also her partner David from Forever Everly, then just Google that. And if not, you can always give us a call right here on 3808 1101, and we'll put you guys in touch.